In the Empress's bedroom, a young lady reveled in the intimacy with multiple men simultaneously. She didn't immediately notice an outsider entering. A hooded knight observed this intimate scene for a while, when suddenly Yulia turned her attention to him, outraged that the man dared disturb her. Justo remained silent for a long time, merely watching the ruler and her lovers. However, the young lady quickly realized the fact that her loyal captain of knights had betrayed her mistress. Behind the uninvited guest were other rebels, but this clearly didn't frighten her majesty. She was ready to defend her life from the villains. Arming herself with a butter knife, she signaled to everyone that she would confront the traitors. Pointing her not-so-terrifying weapon at their leader, she made her stance clear. The rebellion began because, a week ago, an order was given to execute several innocent people imprisoned in the tower. That's when Justo decided to turn away from the ruler. There had been a special bond between them, lasting for many years, even before the young lady ascended the throne. But now, all of that no longer mattered, and he bravely lunged at her with a sword. Once, Yulia was not a cruel tyrant but rather a strong aristocrat worthy of respect. The knight had fought alongside her against their enemies. However, the Empress had now lost her mind and become terribly bloodthirsty, which is why it was decided to take her life for the good of the country. The young woman was not about to let the rebels win so easily. Even with such a weak weapon, she resisted the powerful warriors of her guard. Justo, however, managed to catch a moment when the despotic ruler let her guard down and pierced her body with his sword. Before accepting her death, Yulia accused her killer of betrayal and promised him a bitter retribution for his actions. The Empress died with her eyes open, her gaze dimming in an instant, causing the knight's heart to constrict. Therefore, he closed the eyes of his former beloved, expressing hope that she would rest in peace. Thus ended the bloody reign of the ruler. In modern-day Korea, the main protagonist read the novel about Yulia and Justo numerous times, often with a glass of wine after work as it helped her relieve stress. In the story, the Empress managed to conquer the entire continent, a feat no one had achieved before. However, after a prolonged war, she lost her sanity. It was for this reason that her most devoted knight led a rebellion to stop the Empress's deeds and eventually killed her personally. Reflecting on this, the main character also wanted to rid herself of her company's director, as he was perpetually the cause of her stress. Since she couldn't act on this impulse, she decided to drink heavily before her weekend, seeking some form of relaxation. Waking up in the morning, the young woman felt a headache and instinctively reached for a drink of water. However, she soon realized she wasn't in her own bedroom. Everything around her looked incredibly lavish, and the room appeared vast and ornately old-fashioned. Approaching a mirror, the main character was horrified. Instead of her familiar reflection, she saw someone else. Remembering the description of the Empress from the novel, she realized she had become Yulia. Believing this transformation was challenging since becoming a novel's character seemed utterly impossible. Still, she soon grasped that this wasn't a dream. Noticing a system to summon servants, Yulia decided to use it, and a maid promptly entered her mistress's chambers. To determine how much time she had left before her demise, the Empress inquired about the current date from the maid and was horrified by the answer. There were only 3 days left before the uprising, which meant she had a very short time to devise a way to prevent her grim future. Recalling the main events from the original story, the protagonist understood that her character hadn't always been a tyrant. Back then, the people supported their ruler. After the wars to conquer neighboring states, Yulia underwent a significant change, developing a thirst for bloodshed. Furthermore, Duke Fez frequently reported alleged criminal acts by those who betrayed the Empress's trust, deceiving her. The despicable man also called the Empress too soft-hearted when she sentenced certain individuals to exile, thereby pushing her towards delivering a death sentence to them. Being a puppet in the hands of this villain, Yulia ordered the execution of those who were actually innocent. The next day, Justo came for an audience with the Empress. He pleaded with the woman he held dear to his heart to overturn her harsh verdict, assuring her that those sentenced had not betrayed her. However, she did not wish to hear the young man out and, instead, was indulging with her lover right in the throne room. She then offered the captain a drink and to relax with her or else to leave. Until that day, the knight had firmly believed that his mistress would come to her senses and be as kind and just as before. But at that moment, he realized that this was not going to happen, seeing her indifference. The protagonist suddenly understood the pain the poor guy must have felt back then, but that was not the main concern now. The primary goal became to stop her assassin. To achieve this, she would have to retract the death sentence for the innocents. However, a compelling reason was needed, and there was no guarantee that even such measures could promise her safety, considering Justo had agonizingly decided to kill someone he was in love with. Regardless, given that her demise was imminent, it was worth considering the options to halt the execution as the most effective way to survive. An idea struck Yulia. She could expose the truly guilty party, Duke Fez. By doing so, she might justify her previous actions as a plan to unveil the man's crimes. To achieve her objective, she needed to meet with those who were well informed, so she asked her attendant to take her to the tower for a rendezvous with the accused. Meanwhile, Justo and other future rebels were discussing their plan. Even though the knight was loyal to the Empress, he now felt compelled to break his own oath. In 3 days, they were to engage in battle. Not only was the protagonist meant to be killed, but also the treacherous Duke Fez. Only through their deaths could a coup be successfully staged, and the leader vowed to personally end the girl's life. Suddenly, a guard rushed into the room, informing them that the Empress would soon be present and that they should conclude their discussion before her arrival. Approaching the designated structure, the main heroine pondered about a mage named Felix and a chancellor called Cyril Benuse, both of whom she needed in order to halt the uprising and ultimately survive. The tower, which currently served as a prison, was formerly the abode of a very powerful and renowned wizard, giving it unique characteristics. He had conducted experiments with the climate, and after the building was vacated, Duke Fez, capitalizing on Her Majesty's trust, suggested using it to hold prisoners. By that time, Yulia had already fully immersed herself in a life of decadence, so she didn't argue and believed everything she was told. The man, knowing he might get caught and be punished for his misdeeds, decided to frame others in Yulia's eyes to save himself. At a time when the Empress was at war, it was this man who assumed the primary responsibilities of governing the state. To retain power after the war, he began lacing the young woman's alcohol with drugs, depriving her of her senses. Hearing the footsteps of Her Majesty, the tower guards hastily fell to their knees to avoid her wrath. However, Yulia was far more merciful than usual and asked them to rise and lead her to the prisoners on one of the upper floors. Unexpectedly, the protagonist noticed that as she neared the room she sought, the air temperature became more comfortable, likely due to Felix's magic. Entering the room of the innocents who had been sentenced to death, the Empress was formulating her plan. Originally, she had only intended to exile them, but the treacherous Duke had insisted on their execution. Thus, Her Majesty feigned ignorance as to why these people were imprisoned, implying she had envisioned a different punishment for them. This surprised everyone present, especially the mage who had held out hope that the Empress would revert to her former self. In his childhood, the boy was reviled for his abilities, viewed as different and even frightening. Meeting Yulia during the war, he decided to follow her, offering his magical prowess and promising his usefulness to the young woman. She, without any conditions, took the boy with her, proposing he become the Empress's page, to which he gladly agreed. Therefore, even after the death of the lady he respected, Felix couldn't harbor any hatred for her and believed there was a logical explanation for the changes in her demeanor. The protagonist, while in the prisoner's dungeon, indicated she knew about the magic used by the mage to control the temperature on the floor. However, she didn't want to punish him for it, since her command was violated and the accused were placed in a cell to await execution instead of being exiled. She would take responsibility for the oversight. Thus, Her Majesty now ordered the release of all prisoners. Moreover, she promised not to blame them if they decided to turn away from her after all that had transpired. Nevertheless, she invited all who were willing to continue serving her to come to the palace the next day, most especially the wizard. She then decided to meet another individual imprisoned near the tower's top. The attendants accompanying the ruler couldn't traverse such a long distance, and it grew colder as they ascended. Therefore, she allowed them to remain at a lower level and await the Empress's return there, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically kind. Approaching the door, the main heroine realized it looked as if it was frozen over, but she still tried to open it. Surprisingly, the handle yielded, and entering the room was entirely possible. Count Cyril Benuse was quite astonished by such a visitor, and didn't understand why the queen had come to see a criminal like him. However, she had a special directive for him. The Duke, Fez, had to be accused, and Yulia was certain that this man could do it better than anyone else. Unexpectedly, Justo entered the room. Her Majesty was taken aback. Such a scene wasn't in the novel. This man was supposed to be somewhere else. Feeling disoriented upon seeing the uninvited guest, her first instinct was to ask why he had come. Seeing this man for the first time, she clearly recognized who stood before her. Such a vivid image from the original story couldn't be mistaken for anything else. The knight was the most attractive of all characters. Attempting to justify his actions, the captain explained he wished to accompany his mistress. Of course, this was a foolish lie, as she never needed to be escorted. In truth, the young man was clearly worried about the prisoner, fearing he might become the victim of the bloodthirsty woman even before an official execution could take place. However, the main heroine couldn't share her plan with him, as doing so would make quelling a future uprising much more challenging. Therefore, she decided to use her status and dismiss Justo. Yulia never asked for his protection, and he had no right to act on his own, especially if he didn't want to face severe punishment given her assumed character. Observing the young man's reaction and analyzing the situation, Her Majesty realized that the knight indeed no longer trusted the one he had been loyal to. But now her personality had changed dramatically, offering a chance to rectify this trust. The Duke tried to defend himself, but it was futile. Even the imprisoned Count understood how unacceptable his behavior towards the Empress of the Empire was, and he was not pleased with Justo's presence in his cell. Ultimately, holding back his anger, the captain of the warriors reluctantly left the room, having no other choice. Watching him leave, the girl hoped her potential assassin wouldn't hide behind the door to eavesdrop on the conversation within the dungeon. The fact that he hadn't noticed the Empress's disorientation was a significant relief. Now, she needed to focus on her conversation with Count Benuse, as he was crucial in preventing Yulia's death. Assuming the man thought she was mad, she offered to share her intentions with him. However, it seemed there was no need for that. Cyril had long awaited the moment to finally present all the charges he had accumulated against the deceitful Duke Fez. Therefore, he immediately agreed to her proposal. Upon returning to her quarters, the main heroine felt extremely tired. Living in another's body was more challenging than she had anticipated. The only consolation was that after dismissing all her handmaidens, she could finally be alone. Now, Yulia could calmly reflect on her conversation with the Count. In truth, she admired the man, as he was a foreigner, which made him stand out from the other aristocrats, yet he had managed to achieve so much. It turned out that Duke Fez had amassed so much power that he even dared to assign a watch over the Empress to monitor her every move and action. And yet, the brave Count decided to gather compromising information on such a dangerous and influential person in the palace, a move that was commendable. During her conversation with Cyril in the dungeon, Her Majesty realized that he didn't fully trust her, as he was trying to determine whether she had consciously decided to level accusations against someone so close to her. The imprisoned man candidly admitted that he was prepared to die, and thus no gratitude for his rescue was needed. This greatly surprised the Empress, as she had expected a completely different reaction. Additionally, the Count easily surmised that he was being used. However, despite this realization, he agreed to cooperate, though he did not promise full loyalty to the ruler. In any case, Yulia was quite pleased with her successes. She managed to secure a valuable ally. Even if he didn't promise her loyalty, it's unlikely he will betray her anytime soon. Plus, the mere act of serving someone can be burdensome. Waking up the next morning, the main heroine realized she wasn't alone in the room. She hoped that the servants she had released from the tower had come to her aid. As it turned out, her new handmaiden was genuinely kind. Even her voice conveyed the young woman's gentleness, and she took good care of her mistress. It's astounding how devoted these people were to their Empress, willing to serve her even after what had transpired, though they were still somewhat fearful of her after the threat of execution. It seemed that not everyone had come, as Felix was notably absent among these people. It's likely he hadn't forgiven Yulia for imprisoning him in the tower. This meant the main heroine's assumption was incorrect, as she had expected only the mage to come. But things turned out quite differently. As if sensing Her Majesty's anxious thoughts, one of the handmaidens informed her that the young man she was so concerned about was waiting outside the door since she wasn't yet dressed. The water provided for the Empress's washing had a citrus scent. Plina remembered that her mistress liked it, as it had often been used in the past. Every season, the young woman was offered a variety of fragrances, prepared with utmost care to avoid inciting her wrath. But after her madness, she had grown to dislike the citrus scent, so the handmaiden took a risk using it. Even as the main heroine was being dressed to leave her room, she couldn't stop thinking about this kind gesture from the young woman, a gesture the previous inhabitant of this body might not have appreciated. Finally, Felix could meet with his mistress. The other servants left the room in good spirits. The Empress was her old self again, and they could feel safe. The young mage was also delighted to see Yulia. He even shed tears upon seeing her pleasant reaction to his presence, overjoyed that the positive rumors about changes in her temperament turned out to be true. The main heroine was overjoyed that all the people loyal to her had agreed to return, even after what she had done to them in the past. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to trust anyone in this world. Felix expressed his readiness to follow orders. Though the Empress felt the weight of his words, she was pleasantly surprised by his loyalty. Her first request was for him to calm down. Suddenly, one of the handmaidens burst into the room, attempting to announce the arrival of Duke Fez. However, before she could properly convey the message, the Duke entered without the Empress's permission, as if it were his right. Her Majesty froze upon seeing this scoundrel, for he bore a chilling resemblance to a boss she had deeply feared in her past life. Even in the world of her beloved novel, the main adversary had the same face, as if he was haunting the poor girl. Unexpectedly, the Empress raised her hand and, to her astonishment, transformed it into a sword. The sight even took her by surprise, causing her opponent to tremble with fear. Witnessing the terror in the main antagonist's eyes, Yulia became more confident. She feigned an attempt to assure the man that she had no intention of killing him, but in reality, it was a direct threat. Surprisingly, the Duke confidently stated that the main heroine simply couldn't try to kill her closest subject. After this incident, the Empress contemplated how easy it would have been to end the traitor's life on the spot. However, Benuse wouldn't have approved of such an action, and she didn't want any issues with the Count, who had only recently become her ally. Fez tried to understand the motives behind the Empress's actions and why she had released the criminals. However, she stuck to her plan, revealing that she never intended to imprison them in that tower. The Empress also implied that she was aware of the Duke's unilateral actions, where he took it upon himself to decide the traitor's death sentence without an order. In the kingdom, power was held by 3 individuals, 2 of whom brought nothing but trouble. Fez was a corrupt and extremely greedy man, while Yulia was perceived as a cruel ruler. The only one who thought rationally and acted in the best interests of the empire's citizens was Justo. He became the leader of the rebels, whose initial plans weren't as radical as a complete change of power. However, as the ruling aristocrats began to overstep their bounds, they were left with no choice. The situation could have shifted in a positive direction if Yulia had stood up to the real traitor. However, such a stance would raise questions about the sudden change in her position. The rebels would hear about this, and likely, Count Benuse would attempt to quell the rebellion. This would create a divide that the main heroine could exploit, aligning herself with a faction to openly oppose the enemy. For now, Fez tried to justify his actions, arguing he acted in the Empress's interests since she had given the criminals a light punishment and could be in danger. He was skilled in delivering eloquent speeches, but now he only aggravated the Empress further. She knew the Duke always looked down on her, pretending to be a submissive servant only in her presence. Gaining confidence in his imminent victory, the traitor tried to lead the Empress astray, offering her alcohol, slipping drugs into her drinks, and bringing handsome men to her chambers. He did all this in a bid to seize power, seemingly obsessed with this goal throughout his life. This evoked nothing but anger and pity towards him. Reflecting on this, Yulia couldn't help but compare him to her boss from her previous life. However, there was a key difference. Here, he was her subordinate, making it easier to stand up to him. As a result, she accused him of his misdeeds once again. Ignoring the nation's ruler's commands, he simply acted on his own discretion, which was incredibly disrespectful towards her. The final straw was when he had her loyal supporters executed. His words about loyalty were nothing but a pitiful lie, impossible to conceal. This situation irritated Yulia. However, she was stronger than she appeared, having created a sword and effortlessly entering the Count's chamber, a door of which was frozen, suggesting the character's physical abilities had transferred to her with the body. At the moment, the only person posing a threat to her was Justo, who had killed the Empress in the original story. She easily resolved the issue of finding evidence against Fez by calling for an immediate review of his reports. If he had nothing to hide, he shouldn't oppose it. However, the man's face displayed terror. It's no surprise anyone would be anxious if their work was under scrutiny, especially if they had something to hide from prying eyes. Yulia instructed her subordinate to rest while his work was being reviewed, even though he tried to persuade her against it. His objections only angered her further. After all, she was the Empress and had given an order that must be followed. Otherwise, she would enforce it by force. It was time for the traitor to witness her power. She threatened the coward again with her crafted sword, and he couldn't hide his terror. He even collapsed to the floor, assuring the ruler that he would never dare to defy her. Kneeling, Fez apologized for the words he spoke to her. Inwardly, he couldn't fathom why she had changed so drastically and speculated on the reasons, one of which was a possible withdrawal from not having drugs in her system for a long time. Despite the Empress's demeanor, he decided to calm her, hoping to regain his influence later. Surprisingly, she didn't punish her defiant subordinate immediately. Instead, she granted him a legitimate 3-day leave, after which something special and unexpected awaits him. The Duke, once brilliant, was now powerless to hide his crimes during his tenure overseeing the Empire's internal policies. His ascension to the position was pure chance since his predecessor left no heirs, and as the only relative, he took the vacant spot. Though it's unclear why the heroine of the original story didn't address this issue immediately, its importance has waned now. What's crucial is gathering enough evidence against the scoundrel during his absence from his position. Before concluding their pointless conversation, the girl offered her adversary a few insincere compliments, aiming not to appear too confrontational without definitive proof against him. In reality, she was seething with anger, unable to stomach his deceitful smiles and the hateful face of her superior, which haunted her even after her rebirth. However, her immediate concern lay elsewhere. Her first task was to identify inconsistencies in the Duke's reports and expose his crimes. To achieve this, she asked her maids to bring all the documents from his office directly to her. Giving orders felt somewhat uncomfortable for her. After all, the people here were loyal to the original soul inhabiting her body, entirely unfamiliar with her current persona. Yet, she needed the assistance of everyone to execute her plan. Yulia also requested documents related to the execution of the innocent, and was planning to give a special task to Felix. The young mage looked at the ruler with a bright smile, which was endearing and symbolized the utmost trust. He remained an innocent child, uncertain of what to expect from the Empress. However, there was a suspicion that this smile was merely a facade. For, while Her Majesty and all her servants perceived Felix as just a boy, he would eventually rise to become the supreme mage. Once, he overheard a nobleman making derogatory remarks about Yulia. Without hesitation, he inflicted the man with nightmarish visions, driving him to the brink of madness. Before long, the noble came begging for forgiveness. The young mage gave no indication of his involvement but took pleasure in the fact that even such individuals could recognize the wisdom and greatness of the girl he held in high regard. It was fortunate that he held deep loyalty towards the Empress, ensuring he would never harm her. Even though he should have faced retribution for his actions against the aristocrat, the main heroine couldn't bring herself to punish Felix. He seemed too endearing. Instead, she tasked the young man with shadowing the Duke during his time of rest and covertly severing all his external contacts without anyone becoming the wiser. Eagerly accepting the task, the mage immediately set to work, wielding a feathered pen, once a gift from the Empress, to cast his spells. The sight was both awe-inspiring and eerie. Once this mission was accomplished, the heroine instructed him to also stabilize the temperature in the prisoner's tower, as there were still innocent souls suffering due to Fez's malevolence. He seemed incredibly enthused by such requests. It was clear why. Felix harbored a strong dislike for the Duke, who behaved presumptuously with Her Majesty and often acted counter to her directives. He also detested how the traitor ridiculed Justo, the individual the mage's respected lady trusted most. Previously, the young man had been compelled to remain silent about all of this due to the Empress's wishes. Now, as she too finally recognized the man's flaws and readily stood against him, the sorcerer was overjoyed and ready to assist in any way he could. Even with paperwork, he happily delved into it alongside Yulia, their primary goal being to locate the materials that could release Count Benyus from his cell. At last, they discovered a document which, due to a lack of evidence against Cyril, could facilitate his release. An immediate order for his freedom was dispatched. Upon reviewing numerous documents, the main heroine noticed that the records were maintained similarly to how her boss from her past life used to handle them, which only intensified her annoyance. This was largely because she had to sift through multiple pages of reports that could have been condensed onto a single page. Detestable individuals prioritized quantity over the quality of their work. Plina suggested Her Majesty take a break from the strenuous task and brought a special tea, which turned out to be delectable. Yulia hadn't tasted such a beverage in a long time, even though she used to frequently indulge in the pleasant Chinese origin drink. Its cultivation and preparation were quite intricate, as even the brewing process required specific conditions. Any mistake could significantly taint its flavor. The maidservant personally cultivated, harvested, and properly dried the tea leaves. After tasting it just once, the main heroine regretted that in her past life, she had a preference only for coffee. Yulia thanked the girl for her efforts, delighting in the pleasant taste. She regarded her past abstention from the tea as a significant loss. Suddenly, word reached the Empress that Justo wished to meet with her. She couldn't decline, even though she hadn't expected to see him so soon. The captain was skeptical about the rumors of changes in Her Majesty's character, and wanted to verify them himself. Even if the Empress greeted him with her usual smile, he approached her with caution. The main heroine understood his motives all too well. This was the second time his feelings for the woman he had long been in love with might have to change. But she simply wanted to survive and was ready to keep misleading her potential assassin. Moreover, Yulia pressed the knight, trying to discern any suspicions he might have about the Empire's ruler. However, he remained non-committal in his response. Once, the girl's bright smile and her demeanor would have been seen as positive to the soldier who had completely trusted her. Now, he couldn't afford to blindly believe everything given recent events. This was because he had firmly decided that the Empress he once knew no longer existed. It would thus be wise to eliminate what she had become. As soon as servants announced the arrival of Count Benuse, the knight decided to leave the Empress's chamber, allowing her to continue with her work uninterrupted. Immediately after the captain's departure, Yulia breathed a sigh of relief. She was exhausted by everything happening around her, but she couldn't afford to give up, knowing her life was at stake. Cyril entered the room, and while the girl was quick to show him courtesy, he declined to reciprocate, choosing to be deliberately brusque with her instead. Perhaps confident in the knowledge that she wouldn't want to harm someone so valuable to her, he carried himself with an air of assurance around her. Nonetheless, the Empress was pleased with the man's release. The Count was ready to draft a complaint against the deceitful Duke who had so easily betrayed his Empress and the country. All the transgressions were compiled into a scroll he had brought with him. Upon examining it, Yulia realized the immense value of this document. Everything was detailed meticulously, a welcome sight after having read through a myriad of poorly drafted papers. The violations were listed from the most minor, escalating to major infractions, including an instance where the accused managed to embezzle a significant portion of the Empire's budget. This seemed strange. Surely there were overseers assigned to monitor the man's activities, but it appeared even they might have been complicit. The Count's actions were commendable. He had gone through countless reports and documents to uncover these wrongdoings, clearly driven by a desire to expose the crimes of corrupt aristocrats. The next morning, the protagonist sprang from her bed, fully aware of the crucial day ahead. If she didn't put forth her utmost effort today, by tomorrow the rebels would be at her door. Consequently, she had spent almost the entire night working, gathering essential materials, and summoning all the close aristocrats to the palace to levy charges against Duke Fez. Even though the preparations had gone well, the Empress was still consumed by anxiety about how society would react to the news of one of the country's most influential figures being implicated in wrongdoing. Earlier, Felix had relayed the Duke's stunned reaction upon being summoned to the palace, given that he had previously managed to cleverly conceal his nefarious activities against Yulia. It was highly possible that he was plotting something even now. Regardless, she had to make her way to the throne room, despite her strong reluctance. As the door opened, a knight announced the arrival of Her Majesty. Taking her rightful place, the young woman courteously greeted everyone present and disclosed the reason for such an urgent assembly. Fez, who previously oversaw the nation's domestic affairs, was not at all who he seemed at first glance. It was time to expose the criminal and level serious allegations against him. The public struggled to absorb this unexpected revelation, as many had considered the Duke to be a good man and a diligent worker who had always remained loyal to the Empress. With just one glance from Yulia, the rising turmoil around her was quelled. Everyone was terribly afraid of her wrath, for they knew it could bode ill for those it was directed at. Cyril began to announce the list of charges. It was important that he did so, for then Justo might believe that the young woman truly had changed in character, and might even assist her. Naturally, the villain Fez tried to salvage his tarnished reputation, attempting to use as a defense that the person accusing him of crimes was himself declared a traitor. However, the Empress had already absolved Benuse of any blame. The only chance for Fez, graciously given by the Empress, was the opportunity to defend himself during the ongoing assembly, after the complete list of his crimes was announced. Now, at last, the Count could calmly continue reading everything he had discovered in the man's reports, his records, and more. Meanwhile, the protagonist recalled her past life, where she used to submit documents for review to her boss, who would repeatedly reject them for petty reasons, simply to mock her. Nonetheless, there was a silver lining to that challenging job. Now, she had mastered the art of presentations, and thanks to Felix's magic, she was able to showcase something similar to the aristocrats present at the palace, thereby capturing their attention. Every word from Cyril was accompanied by vivid examples and was well received by the audience. The list of crimes was lengthy, but eventually came to an end, leaving the final word to Her Majesty. Yulia rose from her throne and approached the Duke. Of course, he couldn't think of any plausible excuses, only shouting that he had been slandered, making one last effort to avoid punishment. However, the Empress unsheathed her sword, pointing it directly at the face of the culprit, and then wounded his hand when he tried to shield himself from her blow. But to kill him outright would have been unjust. Thus, she ordered only for his arrest and to imprison him in the tower until the time of his trial, where the final verdict would be given. This decision caused murmurs among the crowd. For many years, no one had been tried fairly due to the changes in the Empress. This very act stood as solid evidence of her transformation. The guards dragged away the man, who kept protesting against such a decision. But no one wanted to listen to a traitor like him. Then, Yulia proclaimed that from that moment on, all criminals and greedy aristocrats who broke the law for money would be punished according to their deeds. It was time to change the corrupt system. The rebels discussed their next course of action under the cover of night in a quiet room. Everything was ready for the beginning of the revolt, but the changed character of the Empress could pose significant challenges for them. So, they decided to postpone the rebellion until after the Duke's trial. However, not everyone agreed with this decision. Many believed it was just another whim of the tyrant. Among them was Count Benuse, who no longer wanted to work with this group if they couldn't believe in something as evident as the now noble intentions of the protagonist. Initially, the rebellion was intended to save countless lives. But if it's now possible to do so without cruelty and bloodshed, it's worth seizing such an excellent opportunity. The remaining members of the group were not pleased with this decision, but they also wanted to hear Justo's opinion, as he knew the Empress better than anyone else. He didn't have a definitive answer. Before, he believed that a coup was the right solution, but after observing Her Majesty's actions recently, he wasn't so sure. After the aristocrats' assembly, he began to seriously contemplate whether such harsh measures were necessary. Moreover, the young man always felt guilty for not being able to help his beloved, who had changed for the worse. On the day when he pleaded with her to cancel the execution of the innocent and she was only thinking of wine and relaxation, he realized that nothing could be changed. He decided to kill her with his own hands, though he truly wished she would come to her senses. Back in the throne room, for the first time in 2 years, he saw the bright golden sword, which he had loved since his time serving as a regular knight, though it might have just been a foolish fantasy. Thus, Justo told the rebels that he would meet the Empress the following day and verify for himself whether her recent behavior can be trusted. After all, before making such a crucial decision, it's essential to know the truth. Meanwhile, Yulia was relaxing in a bath prepared by Plina, who skillfully selected herbs to help unwind after a long day. The tragic events were set to begin tomorrow, but after recent developments, it seemed unlikely that the Count would want to participate. As for others, there was no such certainty, especially regarding Justo. Either way, all that remained was to wait. The main protagonist dreamt of a duel with the captain of the knights, resembling the one described in a book. However, in contrast to the story, their weapons were evenly matched. Despite this, she couldn't match the skilled warrior's expertise and was defeated. Upon awakening, she was horrified. She immediately touched the spot where the adversary's sword had struck her in the vision, exhaling in relief upon realizing the wound was also imaginary. It was quite evident why she had this nightmare. Today was the day Yulia was fated to die in the original story, betrayed by someone close to her. Felix had already informed her of the decision to postpone the rebellion for some time, yet she remained anxious about the potential future. During her morning routine, the Empress sought to confirm with her maid the time of her scheduled meeting with Justo. This audience would be decisive, as it would be her chance to ascertain her safety. It's likely that the protagonist's previous life had come to an end, and there might be no way to rectify that. All she could do was to hang on in this world for as long as possible. While in her office, Her Majesty pondered the Duke's transgressions, which meant more work ahead for her. She couldn't help but marvel at how much he resembled her boss from another reality. Now it was necessary to visit the court and appoint Count Benuse as the chief advisor, as well as assign him several tasks that could prove useful in the future. Her thoughts were interrupted by a servant who informed her of Justo's arrival. who was already awaiting his audience with the Empress. This time, the young man greeted the sovereign appropriately, bowing his knee before her. He had not worn armor for this meeting, and his demeanor was notably more positive than on previous occasions. As it turned out, the knight wished to see Yulia's aura and didn't hesitate to openly ask her to reveal it. After all, no words could verify the changes in the Empress's character as precisely as the golden hue surrounding her. Of course, the main protagonist easily accomplished this simple request, especially considering that her survival was directly dependent on it. She filled the room with the exact shade the young man hoped to see. The knight then admitted, with evident shock, that he had doubted her majesty. He had lost hope of seeing the Yulia he had once loved with all his heart and asked for punishment for his doubts. However, the Empress chose not to take any action. She was convinced that such a noble individual had not committed a significant betrayal, at least not yet. Though she might not have been the original persona of the Empress, she was still destined to become her, to govern the state rightly. And for that, she needed Justo. The young man asked the main heroine to swear her allegiance to him once more. Of course, she did not object. It became clear that the girl had managed to avoid the death foretold in the original story, which she had read countless times. A day before Yulia's meeting with Justo, Felix used his abilities to observe the actions of the rebels. It was decided to abandon the rebellion, at least until the audience was held. Yet, the young mage was infuriated by the disrespect shown towards the girl, who was of much higher status than all of them. He even wanted to retaliate against them, but he had a different mission as a sorcerer. After speaking with the captain, it appeared that everything was indeed going well. There shouldn't be an uprising, but there remained the matter of dealing with Duke Fez during the trial. Even in the book, he had evaded punishment. While the new rulers were restoring the empire, the vile man was amassing an army, which eventually declared war on the empire, as many states did not support it. Due to Yulia's absence, who was well versed in military matters, the country struggled for a long time, continually battling and defending its borders from external attacks. As soon as Her Majesty pondered this, Felix burst into her office. He had been watching the captured Duke for a long time and learned that he began making moves to save himself. It turned out that from the liar's entourage, Count Arita was making attempts to reach his ally, Fez. From the novel, it was known that this man was as greedy as the Duke and even used him to gain power. He also managed to evade accusations on the day the criminal was captured. A few days later, late at night, the criminal lay awake in his cell, pondering what could have gone wrong with his meticulously crafted plan. He had spiked the Empress's drink with drugs upon her return from the war and had men lead her astray. All this was done to cloud her judgment, giving him the chance to manipulate her like a puppet while he reveled in the royal lifestyle. However, for some reason, she had evaded his schemes. He now had to demonstrate to the naive girl that she didn't truly hold any power. To do so, he needed allies. Arita had just discovered the cell where the prisoner was held and hurried to free him, unable to bear witnessing the deplorable condition of his benefactor. They had to escape quickly, using the sewer system to avoid running into guards. In fact, Fez had a contingency plan for such an event, and he already had allies among families ruling kingdoms opposed to the empire. Yulia wouldn't be able to withstand the union of multiple countries. Navigating through the sewers, the Duke was agitated by the unpleasant odors and rats. Still, it was better than languishing in a dungeon, awaiting judgment. Emerging onto the street, he hoped to finally relish the freedom he desired. However, as it turned out, he couldn't, because Yulia was already waiting for him, having been forewarned of his escape plans. The men were shocked by the appearance of the Empress and were deeply frightened, knowing the dire consequences they might face. Moreover, all of Count Arita's knights, who were supposed to meet the fugitives on the street, were already lying on the ground, barely breathing, making the greedy aristocrat's situation even more dire. For even this scenario, the Duke's accomplice had a plan. He threw a magical orb into the air, summoning reinforcements. He was confident that the naive Empress had brought only a few warriors with her and would certainly lose to him. Naturally, the avaricious aristocrat expected a handsome reward for his assistance once power was seized in the palace. But Fez was not stingy with promises, as long as he was saved from this dire predicament. Now, convinced of his impending victory, the condemned man decided to mock the Empress, blaming her for all the deeds he himself had instigated over the years. His attempts to demean her were pitiful, but the man persisted, ordering his allies' soldiers to seize the main heroine or better yet, end her life altogether. He, however, had underestimated her. Wielding her legendary golden sword, she lunged into the fray, defending herself and her people. The enemies couldn't believe the radiant glow emanating from her. Some time ago, Yulia had challenged the captain of her knights to a duel to test her capabilities in this body. While she initially appeared hesitant, she eventually matched the young man in skill. At one point, the young man was so overjoyed seeing his beloved return to her former self that he carelessly missed a strike, resulting in a wound to his shoulder. This did not sit well with Her Majesty. Now, as she battled her enemies, the main heroine was very grateful for the sparring experience she had previously sought, as she now felt much more confident on the battlefield. The young man, watching Yulia, wore a contented smile, for her active participation in the battle signaled that she had truly returned to her former self, as if the harrowing past years had never happened. However, he too couldn't merely stand by and watch the battle unfold. He wanted to assist as much as possible, just like Felix, who stood beside him. Thus, in the end, the trio of skilled warriors, fighting side by side, easily overcame the squadron threatening the Empress's life and the country itself. Throughout the battle, they defended each other, ensuring the enemies couldn't land a single blow. Observing the victors, the defeated party was in shock, unable to fathom how such an outcome was possible. When it became clear that the culprits would face their just punishment, each one knelt, begging for mercy and attempting to justify their actions with rather foolish explanations. It was strange that such individuals had been allowed to attain power in the first place. This oversight was clearly a lapse in judgment on the Empress's part, and it was time to rectify the situation. The trial for the Duke was imminent, and the Empress herself would escort him there. As for his accomplices, they were ordered to be arrested for further investigation. Many gathered in the throne room. Some were already convinced of Fez's guilt, while others remained skeptical of the Empress, an inevitability given the circumstances. The trial began, and Benews once again read out the charges. This time, however, he added 2 more counts based on the recently discovered circumstances. The scoundrel had drugged the Empress and sold information about the Empire's affairs to a neighboring country. The attendees were horrified by the revelations, especially Justo and Felix. They had always been particularly concerned for the young woman, and now they pleaded for permission to execute the culprit. Only then did the court's audience truly reclaim their image of the benevolent Empress that Yulia once was, and they too demanded the defendant's execution. The main heroine, however, indicated that she was reluctant to resort to such measures, but saw no other choice. The criminal's execution would serve as a lesson for everyone else to not commit such acts in the country. Moreover, because of the man's actions, many innocents had been killed, so this retribution seemed quite justified, even if the Duke himself didn't see it that way. On that same day, a swift execution was carried out in the main square. The young woman wasn't sure how the real heroine of the novel would have acted in her position, but she felt confident that she had resolved most of the problems, even if many changes lay ahead. The young woman was sleeping in her chambers when she suddenly, and for no apparent reason, rose from her bed. She woke up at the same time every morning, indicating that the Empress's body was well trained. She also recalled how well she handled situations that were entirely atypical for her past self, such as battles or duels. This made it clear that the real Yulia still lingered somewhat within this body. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain why she felt so confident wielding a sword and believed she was ready to defeat all her enemies. There were now many political problems. Not only did they have to deal with the aftermath of the deceitful noble's actions, but some kingdoms were also threatening the empire. According to the original story's plot, there was one state that had allied with the runaway Duke Fez and waged war against the empire, leading to the death of many innocent citizens. However, such an event should not happen soon, as they had strong warriors like the Empress herself and Justo, who would undoubtedly be on her side. But initiating a war against neighboring countries would be a bad idea. This was because the ruler of the adversaries had a daughter, a powerful sorceress who became a pivotal figure in the conduct of the war due to her ability to manipulate people. Of course, the Empress had a wizard on her side, but it would still be worth learning as much as possible about that mighty young woman. A list of trustworthy individuals would also be invaluable. But she didn't want to think about this now. She preferred to spend some time resting. However, her plans were interrupted by a maid who informed her of an unknown person's request to meet with Her Majesty. Preparing for the audience, she promised herself that she would conduct only this one meeting, and then peacefully relax afterwards. A group of people approached her, seeking forgiveness for losing faith in their sovereign. They were even prepared to accept death for their mistake. Through this, the young Empress understood that she could trust them. As such, she conveyed that she was ready to forgive their transgressions against her, not wanting to lose such loyalty, and requested that they be by her side every day. She asked them to rise, and as their punishment, she commanded them to serve the empire from that day on, never neglecting their duties or her orders. Such lenient measures took them all by surprise. Her Majesty realized she was fortunate, as several individuals had swiftly renewed their pledges of loyalty to her, indicating that things were progressing quite well. Warning them that she might not be so forgiving of betrayal in the future, she decided to promptly assign new roles to her subjects, with Count Benuse being the first. As planned, he was appointed as the new advisor. Naturally, he couldn't disobey the order, but despite this, he expressed his disagreement with the decision. Understandably, Yulia was shocked by the man's choice. She hadn't considered anyone else for the position, as he was undeniably the most talented of all possible candidates. He probably couldn't fully trust the Empress, but she also couldn't force someone without motivation to undertake such a role. Therefore, she decided to assign assistants to him in the future. After this, Her Majesty left the throne room, citing urgent business. She headed to her office to reflect on the recent events, as they disrupted her plans. Since Cyril had expressed his willingness to cooperate from the very beginning, she believed that their collaboration would continue even after passing judgment on their common enemy. However, it seemed she was the only one with this belief. Felix keenly understood his mistress's concerns and decided to support her. After all, aside from the Duke, there were many other options for the advisor role, like the Marquis, who had served her as a secretary during the war. As it turned out, the young mage harbored animosity towards Benuse, much like many others in the castle. Given the circumstances, he didn't hesitate to express his displeasure about this man due to his foreign origin. It was only then that Yulia considered the fact that her subjects didn't object when they heard of the man's appointment. Perhaps it was out of respect for their ruler and her decisions. At that moment, the main heroine realized she needed to view the situation not just from her perspective but also be concerned about societal perceptions and how the nobility would receive her decisions. Now, she didn't plan to make any changes, even though she felt guilty for not being able to please the people she should justly govern. Some time later, Justo met with Count Benuse for tea and an important discussion. It was the captain who had suggested to the Empress to take the man on as chancellor, and he was ready to defend his opinion. Of course, Cyril didn't anticipate this but quickly grasped the young man's motives. However, he cautioned that he was not native to this country, which means such a decision could create a divide in politics and potentially even provide grounds for a rebellion. It now became clear why he wished to serve the empire without holding any high position. Nevertheless, the warrior persisted in urging the count to approach Yulia and accept the post. Demonstrating remarkable loyalty, Justo tried to accuse his interlocutor of not being sufficiently obedient to the young lady. Benuse was thoughtful. He was unsure of how to proceed. The main heroine's actions seemed odd to him. It was in her best interest to choose any nobleman to prevent disdain from the populace. Yet, she acted as she deemed fit. Moreover, the knight had already managed to sway all the subjects in favor of the foreigner. That's why he came now, to persuade Benuse to give his consent, since everything else was prepared for his appointment. To provoke the man, the young lad even attempted a ploy, hinting at Benuse's cowardice and inability to withstand pressure from those around, all for the sake of the respected Empress. While it was a somewhat naive and blatant manipulation, Cyril deliberately decided to play along, confidently choosing to prove his worth to the country and the Empress. Thank you for watching the video. If you want me to make a continuation, write a comment of more than 4 words, and also subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos.